When Robert Downey Jr. sat down for an interview, he expected the usual questions. But the young reporter had other plans. From the moment the camera started rolling, the reporter's tone was off. Cocky, smug, ready to take a shot. He thought he could challenge RDJ, catch him off guard, make him squirm. But what happened next left the entire room speechless, because RDJ didn't just shut him down, he flipped the entire interview on its head. By the time it was over, the internet had already crowned him the winner. The lights were bright, cameras rolling, and the audience hushed. Robert Downey Jr. sat back in his chair, his signature charm on full display. The young reporter, clearly eager to make a name for himself, straightened his tie, smirking as he looked at his notes. From the first few seconds, RDJ knew this wasn't going to be a normal interview. The energy? Office. The reporter leaned in, grinning like he had a trick up his sleeve. "So, Robert, let's be honest here," he said, voice dripping with arrogance. "People see you as this comeback story, but don't you think it's kind of ridiculous how Hollywood just forgives certain people?" The room tensed. The question? A trap. Subtle but loaded. The audience shifted in their seats. The camera crew stiffened, because they all knew exactly what he was trying to do. He wanted RDJ to crack, to stumble, to get defensive. But instead, RDJ just smiled. That classic, unbothered Robert Downey Jr. smirk. "And then," he fired back. "That's a great question," he said, nodding. "But let me ask you something." The young reporter blinked. "How old are you?" RDJ asked, leaning forward. The reporter hesitated. 24. RDJ grinned. "Right. So you've never made a mistake in your life then?" Boom! The audience erupted. Laughter, gasps. The reporter's smugness vanished in an instant. His face flushed. RDJ, still cool, still in control. And what he said next left the entire room stunned. The young reporter tensed, his confidence slipping. The audience hooked. Robert Downey Jr. wasn't playing along with his setup. Instead, he turned the spotlight right back on him. The reporter forced a chuckle, shifting in his seat. "I mean, sure, everyone makes mistakes, but..." RDJ cut him off. No, let's stay on this for a second." The audience leaned in, because now, this was getting good. RDJ clasped his hands together, his signature smirk still in place. "You just implied that Hollywood forgives certain people too easily. So let's talk about that. When do you think someone deserves a second chance?" Oof! The room shifted, because now, the kid had to answer his own trap. The reporter stammered, "Well, I guess it depends on what they did." RDJ raised an eyebrow. "Exactly. And who decides that?" "You." The reporter froze. The audience laughed. RDJ leaned back, completely in control. "Look, man, I get it. You came in here thinking this was going to be a gotcha moment. But let me save you some time." He gestured to himself. "My past? I own it. My mistakes? I've faced them. I didn't get a second chance because Hollywood forgave me. I got one because I worked for it, because I proved I deserved it." Boom! The audience erupted. Applause, cheers. Even the camera crew was shaking their heads, trying not to smile. The reporter, flustered, sweating, searching his notes for a way out. But RDJ wasn't done yet, because what he said next completely flipped the power dynamic. The young reporter's hands tightened around his notes. His plan falling apart. The audience completely on RDJ's side. Robert Downey Jr. still cool, still in control. He adjusted his seat, glanced at the flustered reporter, and smirked. "You know what's funny?" he said, voice smooth, effortless. The reporter swallowed hard. "You're sitting here digging through my past, acting like it defines me." He leaned forward. "But let me ask you something. Where do you think you'll be in 10 years? Silence. The reporter blinked. Well, I hope to still be doing this, growing in my career." RDJ cut him off. "And in those 10 years, you don't think you'll make a mistake? Say something you regret? Do something stupid?" The reporter stammered. The audience locked in. Because now, this wasn't about RDJ anymore. This was about him. RDJ nodded, tapping his fingers on the armrest. Let me tell you something, kid. Life is long, and one day you're gonna screw up. Maybe not in front of cameras, maybe not on a public stage, but it'll happen. And when it does, he gestured around the room. You'll pray to God that people judge you for who you've become, not who you used to be. Boom! The room shook. The audience erupted. Laughter, cheers, a few claps from the back. The reporter? Absolutely speechless. His face burned red. Because now, he wasn't just the guy who tried to embarrass RDJ. He was the guy who got humbled by him instead. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, RDJ dropped one final bombshell. The reporter sat there frozen. His confidence shattered. His scripted questions useless. Robert Downey Jr. completely unfazed. The audience loving every second of it. The young reporter cleared his throat, trying to recover. Well, Robert, I didn't mean to suggest that people shouldn't get second chances. I was just saying. RDJ raised a hand, cutting him off. No, I get it. You came in here with a plan. He leaned back, arms crossed, eyes locked on the reporter. You wanted a moment, a headline, something that would make you look sharp. The reporter's jaw clenched, because honestly, that was exactly what he wanted. RDJ tilted his head. The problem is, you didn't think it through. The audience chuckled. RDJ kept going. Because now, the only thing people are going to remember from this interview is how a guy half my age tried to lecture me about life and got completely shut down. Boom! The audience lost it. Laughter, applause. Even the crew members behind the cameras were grinning. The reporter, face burning. His career wasn't over, but this moment, it would follow him forever. And RDJ, he wasn't done yet, because he leaned forward one last time, voice calm, steady, but deadly sharp. You want to make it in this business, kid? The reporter nodded slowly. RDJ smirked. Then next time, try listening more than you talk. Boom! The audience gave him a standing ovation. The reporter had nothing left to say, and by the next morning, the entire internet was dragging him. By the next morning, the internet was on fire. The clip of Robert Downey Jr. shutting down the young reporter had already gone mega viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and the headlines? Young reporter tries to embarrass RDJ, ends up getting schooled. Robert Downey Jr. just gave the most savage masterclass in handling haters. The interview that ended a reporter's career before it even started. The internet was relentless. Memes flooded social media. When you try to play chess with Iron Man and realize you're just a pawn, RDJ didn't even break a sweat while ending this guy's career. Dude walked in trying to be a journalist, walked out as a life lesson. The reporter? Silent? No tweets? No statements? Because what could he even say? His credibility? Gone. Producers distancing themselves. Even his own network was feeling the heat. One leaked report even said executives were not happy with how this interview was handled. Translation? He was in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Robert Downey Jr. didn't even acknowledge the situation. No tweets, no comments, because he didn't need to. He knew. The best way to handle moments like this? Let the internet do the talking. And this time, they were talking for him. The internet kept tearing the reporter apart. Clips of the interview? Everywhere. People weren't just laughing at his failed gotcha attempt. They were learning from it. Because what Robert Downey Jr. did wasn't just a savage comeback. It was a masterclass in confidence, composure, and shutting down negativity. Podcasters, commentators, even other celebrities started reacting to the clip. This is how you handle bad faith interviews. RDJ stayed cool and flipped it effortlessly. The best part? He never even got mad. He just let the kid embarrass himself. You come for RDJ, you better be prepared. This guy wasn't. Meanwhile, the young reporter? Nowhere to be seen. His social media? Silent. His last post? A promo for the interview, before it all went wrong. And his network? They were scrambling. damage control, PR statements, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Because at the end of the day, no amount of PR could erase the fact that this guy just got owned on live TV. And Robert Downey Jr. didn't have to lift a finger because the lesson had already been learned. And what RDJ did next proved exactly why he's untouchable. Robert Downey Jr. went about his day like nothing happened. No tweets, no interviews about it, nothing. Because he knew he didn't need to say a word. The world had already seen what happened, and the reporter completely disappeared from the spotlight. Producers stopped calling him. Networks distanced themselves. His own bosses, not happy. A leaked report from his network said, "This interview was poorly handled. We will be reevaluating future segments." Translation? They were done with him. And the internet? Still laughing at the guy. Memes, articles, people replaying the clip over and over. Because the truth was, this wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a public lesson. A lesson in humility. A lesson in why you don't come at someone like RDJ unless you're ready for the consequences. And at the end of it all, Robert Downey Jr. walked away completely untouched. Because while the reporter's career was sinking, RDJ's reputation, stronger than ever. Days passed, but the internet wasn't done. The clip of Robert Downey Jr. owning the reporter kept circulating. Everywhere people talked about it. And then, an even crazier twist happened. A different journalist, one with actual credibility, spoke out. In a new article, he wrote, "The real problem here isn't Robert Downey Jr. It's lazy, attention-seeking journalism. This young reporter thought he could make a name by tearing someone down. Instead, he became an example of what not to do. Ouch. The damage? Permanent. The young reporter? Finished. Because after that, his career never recovered. Networks stopped booking him. His name? Synonymous with failure. Meanwhile, Robert Downey Jr. still silent. No gloating. No need to rub it in. Because he knew his actions already spoke louder than any statement ever could. And the final lesson? If you try to embarrass someone who's smarter, sharper, and more experienced than you don't expose them. You expose yourself. And in the end, that young reporter was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Weeks later, the internet moved on. New controversies, new viral moments. But the lesson from that interview still stuck with people. The young reporter vanished from the industry. No major interviews, no big career moves. Because that moment defined him. Producers didn't want to work with someone who lacked professionalism. Viewers didn't trust someone who tried to bait celebrities for clicks. And worst of all, his name became a joke. But Robert Downey Jr. thrived. His interviews, more respected than ever. His reputation, stronger than before. Because the truth was clear. People love a comeback story. And RDJ was the living embodiment of one. He didn't just prove his past didn't define him. He proved that grace, wit, and intelligence always win. And at the end of the day, the world doesn't remember the people who try to tear others down. It remembers the ones who rise above it. Months passed and the world kept moving. New viral clips, new headlines. But that interview, it never truly disappeared. People still referenced it as the perfect example of handling critics with class. Universities even used it in media courses, a lesson in how not to interview a guest. And Robert Downey Jr., unbothered, unaffected, still winning. He was never the guy who let negativity control him. He had already been through far worse in life. And that's what made him untouchable. Because when you've already fallen and rebuilt yourself, no cheap shot interview can break you. The young reporter never got another big break. Producers didn't trust him. Audiences didn't respect him. And soon, his career faded into nothing. Because in the end, people don't remember the ones who try to bring others down. They remember the ones who stand tall, no matter what gets thrown their way. And that's why Robert Downey Jr. will always be a legend. Years later, that one interview still lived on. Not as a scandal, not as a controversy, but as a masterclass. A masterclass in grace under pressure. A masterclass in shutting down critics without losing your cool. People still brought it up in conversations. New talk show hosts studied it. Journalists learned from it. Because what Robert Downey Jr. did that day was bigger than just a clapback. He didn't just defend himself. He exposed a mindset of tearing others down instead of building yourself up. And that's why, long after the world moved on, his words still echoed. As for the young reporter, he became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when you chase headlines instead of respect. Because in the end, the ones who last in this world are the ones who rise above the noise. And Robert Downey Jr. did exactly that. There was one final twist to the story. Years later, the young reporter reappeared, not as a journalist, not as a talk show host, but as a guest on someone else's show. He sat across from a new interviewer, visibly older, more humble, and when they brought up that infamous RDJ interview, he let out a deep sigh. That moment changed my life. The host leaned in. How so? The former reporter shook his head, a small smile forming. Because I was wrong. I went into that interview thinking I was going to expose Robert Downey Jr. But in reality, he exhaled. I exposed myself. The audience stayed silent. Because this wasn't the same arrogant kid from years ago. This was a man who had learned. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was proving something. But the truth is, I was just trying to take a shortcut to success by tearing someone else down. And RDJ, he saw right through it. The host nodded. Do you regret it? The former reporter let out a small laugh. I regret that I didn't learn the lesson sooner. But if I hadn't embarrassed myself that day, I wouldn't be here today, finally understanding what real success looks like. The audience clapped softly, because this was rare, an actual moment of humility. And when the clip went viral, the internet reacted differently this time. No hate, no mockery, just comments like, at least he owned up to it. Respect. A true redemption arc. RDJ didn't just shut him down, he changed his perspective. And somewhere out there, Robert Downey Jr. probably saw the clip and smirked to himself. Because the best comebacks aren't just about proving someone wrong, they're about making them think. And years later, that young reporter finally did. At the end of it all, the lesson lived on. Not just for the young reporter, not just for the internet, but for anyone who watched that moment and understood its deeper meaning. Robert Downey Jr. never needed to clap back with anger. He never needed to tear someone down to win. Because the truth, confidence doesn't need to shout. Wisdom doesn't need to fight. All it took was calm, controlled words and letting the other person expose their own flaws. And that's why, years later, people still look back at that interview as a perfect example of handling critics with class. It wasn't about winning an argument, it was about rising above it. Because in the end, no matter how many people doubt you, question you, or try to tear you down, the ones who succeed are the ones who stay standing, stay focused, and keep moving forward. And that's why Robert Downey Jr. will always be remembered, not for his past, but for the way he carried himself beyond it. There was one final truth that came from that interview. It wasn't just about Robert Downey Jr. winning. It wasn't just about a reporter losing. It was about a bigger lesson on character, growth, and resilience. Because in life, you'll always have people trying to define you by your past. You'll always face critics who want to tear you down. But the ones who truly win are the ones who don't play their game. RDJ didn't lash out. He didn't get angry. He just stayed calm, confident, and let the truth speak for itself. And that's why, long after that moment faded from headlines, it never truly disappeared. It became a lesson, a reminder, that true strength isn't about proving others wrong. It's about knowing who you are and never letting anyone shake that. And Robert Downey Jr., he walked out of that room exactly the same way he walked in, unbothered, untouchable, and completely in control. But the real ending, it wasn't just about that one interview. It was about how people remembered it. Long after the headlines faded, long after the memes stopped circulating, that moment still stuck with people. Because Robert Downey Jr. didn't just defend himself. He showed the world how to handle critics, how to rise above negativity, and how to own your story. And that's why, to this day, people still talk about it. Not as a controversy, not as a celebrity meltdown, but as one of the greatest moments of pure, unshakable confidence ever caught on camera. And Robert Downey Jr.? He never had to explain himself, because his actions said everything. And in the end, that's why he will always be remembered, not for his past, but for how he carried himself into the future.